Hello and welcome to the video. This video is for a Patreon of mine, a Patreon called Ulf. And Ulf was asking about cross trimming. Now, for those of you that fly airplanes, trimming is going to be something that you're very familiar with. However, I'll put a link down below if trimming is something that you've never done. If you're a multi-rotor pilot, then trimming is probably never something that you've been involved in. These extra little controls here, called T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, and T6, are actually the trims. And by default, they're designed to change the middle position of these controls. This is a Mode 2 radio, so we have rudder, throttle, aileron and elevator, and by moving the appropriate trim you can actually get everything sorted out. It's really important for a fixed wing model because typically you're going to need a little bit of aileron trim in one direction or the other to counteract the torque from the motor, and maybe a little bit of elevator trim just to adjust it so it flies straight and level. Now, there are some really nice things in OpenTX. There's something called Instant Trim. Again, I'll put a link to it down below. But Instant Trim is a special function that allows you, if we just put it in here, we'll create another one. We will put it on that switch there, and then we can say Instant Trim. And what that does is that saves the trims or the stick positions as you're flying straight and level immediately onto the trims on the radio. And that can be incredibly useful if you are flying around, you have a model that's really out of trim, you're really having to work hard, you can just flick that momentary switch and it'll save the trims. However, that's not what I want to talk about today. This is for a Patreon of mine called Ulf, and he's talking about cross trim. Now, the reason that cross trim is an interesting thing is because normally the way it works is the trim for the aileron is this trim here. The trim for the elevator is this trim here. Now, that's fine, but the way it works is as you're flying, maybe, for example, the model is always tilting to the left-hand side, so you need a bit of right trim. You'd put in a couple of clicks of trim down here. But to do that, you'd have to take your finger off the model. And if it's only a slight bias towards one side or the other, if you've got enough height, then you've got time to kind of jump on if you're not using something like the instant trim feature that I've just shown. However, a much more sensible way to do it is to use something called cross trim. So rather than have the trims by the control they're interested in, have it on the other side. So for example, have the aileron trim over here. So say for example, you're flying and you need that little right hand pressure, you can then add that using the trim over here rather than over here. And that way you don't have to take your finger off the sticks. And that can be a much, much safer way to do it. So how would you set that up in OpenTX? The cool thing is that you can do pretty much anything you want with the trims, including turning them into switches that you can use for other stuff. Now, by default, when you set the model up, the aileron control is linked to the trim that's going to be for aileron. The elevator control, it just is automatically done for you, but you can change how that works. So if we go back in the model memory and I zoom across to the inputs, what you'll see is for the aileron trim, if I select edit, you'll see that I've said go for trim T5. That's that one up here. So you can't move them around. So aileron trim, if we were moving the aileron, there it is, we'd really want it over here. This is the rudder trim. So we can actually change that to be the rudder trim. And then if we work our way along, and we change the elevator trim to be the throttle trim. Okay, and the throttle trim then is going to be the elevator trim, and then the rudder trim is going to be the aileron trim. We've actually swapped them all around. Now, slightly confusingly, the trims will still move on the screen like they do normally. However, the way they work is slightly different. So here are the channel outputs. So this is, you can see AETR. So aileron, elevator, throttle, and rudder. But now if I want to trim, say the aileron again, you know, we need a bit of right stick, I can add that in here and you can see that trim is being added over here instead. So that is a much better way if you are flying and you want to trim it without taking your finger off the sticks. You can add it in here. But personally, I would always think about setting up something like our friend, the Instant Trim as well. Instant Trim is something I use a lot when I'm maidening a model. It allows me to get it really close, and then it's so close I can just use the standard layout to get it close. But if you want to use cross trims, that is how you set it up in OpenTX. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that if you're trying to learn a topic will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.